Hi, Hallie. It's Aunt Nissa again. I hope you're enjoying your day, and I know I am. I've been looking forward to reading to you. I'm sorry my time has been getting away from me. But we are on page 51 of our book, Summer of the Monkeys, and it looks like, let me just see here. We're coming up to the end of chapter 5. I know I forgot to send those questions for chapters 3 and 4, but maybe I'll just lump it all together. Something quick and easy. Okay? Just make sure you're paying attention. Oh my goodness. I didn't tell you though. There are 239 pages in this book, and we are on page 51, which means we are just getting started. All right. Let's back up just a little from where we left off. Did you ever see anything like that, Rowdy? I said. Your Grandpa was right when he said that monkey was smart, but I didn't think he was that smart. Why, he knew all the time we were here. He sat right up there on that sycamore limb and watched me set my traps. Then he stole all of my apples and laughed at me. Now, how do you like that? My first go around with the monkey left me a little discouraged, but not too much. After all, my grandpa had taught me practically all there was to know about the trapping business. I figured it was just a matter of time until I'd have them all in the sack. Trying to act like nothing happened, I said, Rowdy, that monkey may not know it, but he's messing with one of the best trappers in these Cherokee hills. If he comes back one more time, we'll see who does the laughing. Let's try the old mouse-catching trick on him. I think that will stop this laughing business. Rowdy whined and licked my hand, and that gave me a lot of confidence, and I felt much better. Taking 3 more of my apples, I set them up on a log. Then taking my pocket knife, I cut them in half. Walking over to where my traps were, I lifted them from their hiding places and tripped the triggers with a stick. Untying the strings from the nails and the bushes, I used the short pieces to tie half of the apple to the trigger of each trap. I wrapped those pieces of apple to the top of the triggers as tightly as I could and tied the ends of the strings in hard knots. Then I reset the traps and placed them back in the holes. Very carefully, I covered each trap with leaves, but left the apples in plain sight. Backing off to one side, I took another good look at my trap setting. Every time I had set a trap, I had been proud of the way I had done it, but on that day I was especially proud. You could see the pieces of apple all right, but you sure couldn't tell there were any traps there. Not one shining piece of metal could be seen. Rowdy, I said, I don't care how smart that monkey is. If he gets one of those apples, he's going to wind up with a trap on his foot, and that is all there is to it. All the time I was resetting my traps, I kept looking around in the trees for the monkey. I didn't see one, but I had a feeling that there were 10,000 monkey eyeballs looking right at me. Feeling about as smart as old Trapper Dan himself, I said, Come on, Rowdy. I think the money will start rolling in now. I didn't go straight back to my hiding place. Instead, I took off in another direction, circled around, and came back to it. I thought that I was being smart doing this, but I felt silly too, because if that big monkey was sitting somewhere in the top of a sycamore tree, he was probably watching every move I made. I was so sure I would catch a monkey this time, I didn't sit down on my gunny sack. I held it in my hand so that I would be ready to sack him up the instant I heard the snap of a trap. Hi, honey. It seemed that Rowdy and I had hardly gotten seated when here came the monkeys, leaping, squealing, and chattering. Boy, Rowdy, I whispered, that sure was fast, wasn't it? They must have been waiting for us. Why, the way they're acting, they must think we're playing some kind of game. They won't think it's a game when I get a few of them in the sack. It was a little different this time than it was before. The big monkey was the first one to touch the ground, and he was standing very close to one of my traps. The little monkeys were milling about everywhere. And they didn't seem to know what was going on, but every time one got close to a trap, that big monkey would fly out of gear like a mama jaybird when I wanted to take a look at her babies. He would scream like someone had slapped a branding iron on him and start jumping up and down, making those deep grunting noises. He would run a little at the monkeys and scare the daylights out of them. Finally, he succeeded in herding them all to one side where they bunched up and stayed. If I had known then what the big monkey was going to do next, I wouldn't have stayed there and watched it. Again, he walked over close to one of my traps and stopped. I knew that I was watching a monkey, but still he looked like a small boy standing there, trying to figure something out. Once he even bent over so he could get a better look at things. Then he reached up with one of his long arms and scratched his head. When I saw him do that, I thought of my grandpa. He was always scratching his head when he had something heavy on his mind. "Rowdy," I whispered, "I believe that monkey knows the trap is there, and he's trying to figure out how he can get the apple and not get caught. I don't think he can do it. I don't care how smart he is. He's not that smart." How wrong I was. As if he'd solved the problem and was tickled to death about it, the big monkey turned a few somersaults. He stopped and stared straight at my hiding place. Then he let out another one of those long squalls before he reached down and picked up a long stick from the ground. Holding the stick out in front of him, still uttering those deep grunts, he started beating at the apple as if he was killing a snake. I almost jumped out of my britches when I heard the trap snap. I sat in a trance and watched that $100 monkey spring every one of my traps the same way. Every time a trap snapped, he would look straight at my hiding place and squall. He didn't use his teeth to tear the apples from the triggers. He simply used his fingers and untied the knots in the strings. There was one thing I could say for that monkey. He wasn't only smart, he was very polite, too. He saw to it that the little monkeys got their share of each apple. After it was all over and the monkeys had again disappeared into the treetops, I looked to Rowdy for some kind of understanding. I didn't get any help from him. He was just lying there with his long ears sticking straight up, looking at me as if he were the most surprised hound dog in the world. I was so dumbfounded I couldn't even think straight, much less say anything. For several seconds I sat there staring at the ground, trying to remember everything that had happened. And the more I thought about it, how that big monkey had outsmarted me, the madder I got. "Rowdy," I said, "I wish I had brought Papa's old shotgun along. I'd sure warmed that monkey's hide with some birdshot. It's bad enough that he made a fool out of me, but he didn't have to laugh like that." I put my lunch and apples back in the gunny sack and walked over to where my traps were. Mashing the strings down with all my foot, I released the sticks from the jaws. I put the traps back in my sack, and then I sat down on a stump to do a little thinking. I could remember every trick my grandpa had taught me about trapping, but I couldn't think of a thing that would catch a monkey. The more I thought about everything, the more disgusted I got. Talking to myself, I said, "There's only one thing I can do. I'll have to get rid of that smart aleck monkey. If I can get rid of him, I believe I can catch the little ones. They don't seem to have any sense at all. I'll just go to the house, get Papa's gun, and do away with that monkey once and for all." And then I thought, what in the world am I thinking? I can't do that. Why, it would be like hanging a $100 bill in a tree and shooting it all to pieces. And there was the old man of the mountains. If I shot one of those silly monkeys, there was no telling what he'd do. Old Rowdy saved the day for me, or at least I thought so at the time. About 15 feet from the stump I was sitting on was a big hollow log. Rowdy was over there sniffing around. He never could keep his sniffer out of anything that had a hole in it. He just couldn't do things like that. The instant I saw the log, a plan jumped right out of the hollow end and bored its way into my monkey-troubled mind. I walked over to the log, got down on my knees, looked back into the hollow. It was perfect. The hole was large and went back about 4 feet. I was so pleased I could have kissed old Rowdy, but he never did like to be kissed. Patting the log with my hand, I said, "Rowdy, you could have sniffed all over these bottoms and not found anything this good. This is just what I've been looking for. I'll put my apples back in the hollow and set my traps here out in front. Now, if that smart monkey wants an apple, he'll have to wade through all my traps to get one. If he can do that and not get caught, then we're just beaten. That's all there is to it. Rowdy seemed to know that I was pleased about something. He reared up on me and tickled my ear with his long pink tongue. Come to think of it, Rowdy, I said, I'm starving to death for a drink of water. Let's go get a drink first, and then we'll really get after these monkeys. Not far away, at the upper end of an old slough, the cool, clear water of a spring gushed up from under the roots of a huge gum tree. I always figured that the spring belonged to Rowdy and me. We had discovered it on one of our exploring trips. I had even named it J. Berry Spring. We had a good drink, and I washed my hot face in the cool water. There was never a time that Rowdy and I prowled those Cherokee bottoms that we didn't run into all kinds of surprises. But when I got back to our bur oak tree, I got the biggest surprise of my life. Everything I owned was gone. My gunny sack, lunch, apples, traps, and all. Rowdy, I said, looking all around. I know I left that sack right here in this stump. Now it's gone, and everything we had was in it. I wonder what happened to it. Rowdy started sniffing around the stump. Then he trailed over to a big sycamore, reared up on it, and looked at me and whined. What are you doing that for, boy? I asked him. You know that sack couldn't climb a tree. Regardless of what I said, Rowdy seemed to think that the sack had climbed the tree. He started bowling the tree bark. I had never known my old dog to lie, so I looked up in the branches of the big sycamore, and what I saw all but caused me to fall over backwards. Sitting on a limb, with his back against the trunk, was that $100 monkey. He was just sitting there, as big as you please, with a sandwich in one paw and an apple in the other, eating away and looking straight at me. He had passed out my apples to some of the little monkeys, and they were sitting around on the limbs, chewing away and peering at me with their beady little eyes. I could see my gunny sack with the traps in it draped over a limb. I felt the anger start way down on my feet. It burned its way through my body and exploded in my head. Why, you thieving rascal, I yelled. You can't get away with this. You give that stuff back to me. I saw right away that the big monkey had no intention of giving anything back to me. He stood up on the limb and started jumping up and down and laughing fit to kill. This made me so mad that I came close to cussing a little. While hanging around my grandpa's store, I had learned a few cuss words from men, but I never did use them. I was afraid to. Daisy had told me that if any boy who wasn't 21 years old cussed, his tongue would rot out of his head, so I just didn't do any cussing. I didn't figure I could get along without my tongue, but I was so mad at those monkeys, I had to do something. I grabbed up a chunk from the ground and threw it at him as hard as I could. I didn't come close to hitting him, but it made him mad anyway. He let out a squall and threw one of my apples straight at me. I had to jump sideways to keep it from hitting me. The idea of an old monkey throwing something at me was more than I could stand. I went all to pieces. I had a darn good bean shooter, and I was such a good shot I could almost drive nails with it. I jerked it out of my pocket, reached for some ammunition, and when I discovered that I didn't even have one little rock in my pocket, that made me really mad. It looked like everything in the world was going against me. Not far away was a washout, and the bottom was covered with gravel. I ran over, jumped down into it. Dropping to my knees, I started filling my pockets with small rocks. Rowdy, I said, I don't care what the old man in the mountains or anyone else does. I'm not going to let that monkey get away with this. I'll make it so hot for him, he'll think that the woods are on fire. With my pockets bulging with ammunition, I climbed out of the washout and ran back to the sycamore tree. The big monkey was standing on a limb, jumping up and down and laughing his head off. I loaded my bean shooter and pulled the rubber back as far as I could. Taking dead aim, I let go. Old William Tell himself couldn't have shot any straighter than I did, and I plunked that monkey a good one, about where his belly button should have been. And he let out a squall that could have been heard all over the bottoms and started screeching at the spot where my rock had stung him. I couldn't have been more pleased. I reared back and laughed as hard as I could. Well, how do you like that? I yelled at him. It's not so funny now, is it? Well, you haven't seen anything yet. Chuckling to myself, I loaded up again and took dead aim and plunked him another good one. Well, I never should have shot that big monkey a second time because it made him awfully mad. Turning to the little monkeys, he uttered a few of those deep grunts, and then every one of them started dropping down from the sycamore tree. This was the last thing in the world I expected the monkeys to do, and I didn't like what was happening at all. I started backing up, one step at a time. Holy smokes, Rowdy, I said. They're coming after us. I didn't think they'd do that, did you? By the time the big monkey had reached the last limb on the sycamore tree, I had a pretty good head start on him. He stopped there for a second, opened his big mouth, and showed me those long teeth again. And I wouldn't have been more scared if someone had thrown a crosscut saw at me. I dropped my bean shooter and let out a squall that didn't even sound like me. They're gonna eat us up, Rowdy, I yelled. Let's get out of here. And now we're on to chapter 5, sweet girl. It's getting good, huh? Okay, more soon. Love you so much. Bye-bye.